Hello. Welcome to 365 Bible Stories, a Bible story for every day of the year, from Genesis to Revelations. Thank you for tuning in to today's broadcast. I'm Diann Morgan, your storyteller. For those of you who tuned in to our last Bible story, we talked about Abraham and Sarah and how God blessed them with a son. Now, if you listen to that story, I told you we were going to come back and talk about Abraham's nephew, Lot. In this story, Lot has left Abraham. The reason he left Abraham was because there became a lot of confusion between Lot's shepherds and Abraham's shepherds. And Abraham thought it would just be best if Lot took his family and his shepherd and his whole household and moved to another region. So Lot moved to Sodom. But while Lot was busy moving, Abraham was continuing to do the work of the Lord. Word came to Abraham that the city that Lot had settled in, which is named Sodom, had fallen into evil ways. The Lord had continued to warn Sodom that if they didn't start to become a better people, if they didn't start to listen to the word of the Lord and become obedient, that he was going to destroy the city. But God knew that Abraham's nephew was in this city, and he knew that Abraham had a lot of love for Lot. So God sent some men to tell Abraham that he was going to destroy this city. This really caused Abraham a lot of concern because he loved Lot. So Abraham said to God, he said, God, what if I can find 50 righteous people? If I could do that, would you spare the city? God says, yes, Abraham, I will do that. If you can find 50 righteous people, I will spare the city of Sodom. So Abraham went about looking for 50, and he couldn't find 50. So he came back and said, God, I couldn't find 50. What about if I could find 45? And God, being very patient and loving to Abraham, said, okay, Abraham, if you can find 45, I will spare the city. And I don't know the time frame that God allowed for Abraham to look for these righteous people, but I'm sure quite a bit of time passed because Abraham kept looking and he kept trying to bargain with God. And finally he got down to, God, if I could just find 10 righteous people, would you spare the city? And God said, yes, if you could just find 10, I will spare the city. Abraham came back. I imagine he was just shaking his head and said, Lord, I can't even find 10. So God said, I'm going to let you know right now, Abraham, I am going to destroy the city. God said, I will spare Lot and his family and his entire household. So what God did was he sent 2 angels to the city of Sodom. He sent them to the gate because that's where they found Lot. The whole time Lot had been in Sodom, he had been preaching the word of the Lord. I imagine it was something like when Noah was telling the people it was going to rain. Lot was telling the people that the Lord is coming and he is going to destroy this city if you do not become obedient. If you do not stop your evil ways, God is going to destroy the city. But of course, those people didn't listen. Just like the people in Noah's days, those people did not listen. So when the angels came to the city, they came to let Lot know God is fed up. Now, brothers and sisters, we don't want God to get fed up with us because we're living in the times just like those of Sodom. We hear of all kinds of mass killings. We see the strange weather patterns that we're having. We see just a rise of all kinds of sinful behavior. People just have a reckless disregard for God and for obedience to God. Now, God has given us a blue plate of how we should live our lives, and yet we're still not being obedient. We're still not listening to the word of God, much like the people of Sodom. So when the angels came to talk to Lot and let him know that he needed to gather his entire household, They needed to be ready to leave that city in a hurry, because when God comes back to do what he says he's going to do, which is destroy the city, if they're not gone, they're going to be destroyed along with the city. But Lot had some misgivings, because what he was very familiar with was in that city. His home, his family was in that city. If you remember from the last story I told you, Lot had to leave his hometown of Ur to go with Abraham to the land of Canaan. And because they were separated, he had to move again to the city of Sodom. So I imagine Lot is saying, Lord, I'm comfortable here. I know these people. My family is comfortable. My wife, my daughters, we're all comfortable here. Do we have to move again? But how many of us know that when God tells us we have to do something, it's no bargaining. We have to do what the Lord tells us to do. And Lot, if he wanted to be spared, he was going to have to do what the Lord told him to do. So the angel said, you need to leave now. But Lot started to kind of think about it. He thought about it so long that the angel just grabbed him by his hand and dragged him out of the city. But there was a warning. They said, Lot, when you leave, if you or any member of your household looks back, you will be turned into a pillar of salt. And as they journeyed, they landed at a hilltop. And guess what happened? Mrs. Lot looked back, and instantly she became a pillar of salt. I'm sure that broke Lot's heart. I'm sure it broke his daughter's heart. But God had told them, do not look back. There was a reason why God didn't want them to look back. If they looked back, it means that they had some misgivings about why they were leaving. It means that perhaps they were still holding on to some of the sin that was happening in Sodom, that they still longed to be there. God wanted them to flee from the evilness and from the disobedience from the city of Sodom, because God was getting ready to rain down fire on that city and utterly destroy it. And that is exactly what happened. Next, we're going to talk about what was still going on in Abraham and Sarah's life. If you remember, I told you the Lord had just given them the son that he had promised them. And I also told you that Abraham had fathered a child by Sarah's handmaiden, Hagar. And Hagar and her son had been banished from the household because Hagar was taunting Sarah. So Sarah insisted that Abraham make Hagar and her child leave, and he did just that. But when you read the Bible story, it tells you that the Lord did take care of Hagar and Ishmael, and he made a way for them, because God always makes a way for his people, just as he do for you and I. But also, we also find out in this chapter in Genesis that God has also told Abraham that he wants him to do something for him. And this was something very hard, because he told him that he wanted him to take his son, Isaac, his only son, that he waited 100 years to have, to take him up, put him on a rock, and to slay him. Can you imagine how that would feel? Can you imagine what you would say to yourself, that this God that you trust so much would tell you to take your only begotten son and kill him as a sacrifice? A son that you waited many, many, many years for. A son that you were obedient for. And God said, take him up, stretch him out on this rock, and sacrifice him. So when Abraham heard this, I'm sure his heart was heavy, but Abraham trusted God. But Abraham was willing to do this because he felt such honor, because God gave him a son in the first place. But one thing we know from reading the story is that Sarah was not aware of this. How many of you ladies out there know that you probably would have really, really, really tried to talk Abraham out of this? And I believe Sarah was pretty persuasive with Abraham, because remember, she talked Abraham into having a child with her handmaiden. Then she talked Abraham into sending that handmaiden away once he'd had that child. So I believe Sarah was pretty persuasive when it came to her husband, Abraham. But Abraham believed God. Abraham was a faithful man. So he did just as God had told him to do. He and one of his servants took Isaac up, laid him on a rock, and Isaac said something that was astounding. He said, "Is this a sacrifice, Father?" And Abraham said, "Yes." And he said, "Where is the sacrifice?" Can you imagine what Abraham was thinking? How his heart must have been breaking? Well, let me tell you that even today we have to make sacrifices that we don't want to make. There will be times when the Lord will come to us and tell us to do things that we don't want to do. But how many of us know that when God tells us to do something, He is going to prepare our hearts to do it, and He's going to prepare that perfect sacrifice, just as He did for Abraham. Because when he got ready to actually slay Isaac, the Lord told him to hold his hand. And the Lord prepared a perfect sacrifice in Isaac's stead. The Lord also prepared a perfect sacrifice in our stead, which was His Son, Jesus Christ. There'll be other stories that we'll be talking to you about as well as time goes along, because Isaac grows up and Isaac bears children, of which we will have many stories about as we travel through this journey of 365 Bible stories. It's been so exciting coming into your homes today, and I hope you'll stay tuned when we come again to talk to you about 365 Bible stories. Thank you for watching today. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.